welcome back. Last episode we covered the basics of what characterizes a Souls-like, one of the most popular subgenres in gaming right now, before we got into Sekiro, which essentially made a subgenre out of that subgenre, dubbed a Sekiro-Like. And if you want to boil it down, there's really three crucial things that characterize a Sekiro-like. 1. Consecutive timely parries. 2. Negotiating 2 enemy stats rather than just health. And 3. The presence of a death blow mechanic. So, now that we've talked about Sekiro and how it emerged from the DNA of Dark Souls, we're going to get into some actual examples, as promised, because if there's one thing we don't do here at Team Real New, it's promise sequels and then not deliver. What? Yes, I'm aware that's not accurate. I was just making a joke. Don't put the stuff up on the... So, yes, as my editor so helpfully pointed out just a few moments ago, we do have some issues with the track record of releasing sequels here on the channel. But we're taking very real steps to fix that. If any of the, as of right now, 10 people who have watched the last episode cared about the shorter length, there is a reason for it. That reason being that it's hard to maintain this channel. It's hard to make these videos and release them in a timely fashion for you guys. So, as opposed to longer videos, I'm going to start trimming them down to more focused concepts that I can hopefully put out at a faster rate. Sound good? Anyhow, after that little aside, let's talk about some Sekiro-likes. Now, I've heard tell that Lies of P could be categorized as this type of game, but I haven't had a chance to play it yet, so we're going to talk about 2 games that I have had a chance to play. Thymesia and Rise of the Ronin. Let's play some games. The reason we boiled down what actually characterizes a Sekiro-like is because, like any good From imitation, the 2 games we're going to talk about here brought their own flavor and way of handling things to the table. Even though Souls-likes overwhelmingly share the 4 rules we talked about last time, there's exceptions to any rule. For example, world design. Even just in From's catalog, there's different approaches. Individual levels in Demon Souls, interconnected albeit focused worlds in the Dark Souls games, a mix of the 2 in Bloodborne, and a full-fledged open world in Elden Ring. And Souls-likes have been just as varied, with some games like Nioh featuring individual levels, and some like The Surge featuring a massive maze-like world even more reminiscent of Metroid than the original Dark Souls. A perfect case in point of exceptions is the first subject of this video, Thymesia, which came out in 2022 and faked out Souls-like enthusiasts in a big way. We saw its hybridized Victorian medieval aesthetic in the trailers and thought, aw yeah, time for the Bloodborne-like, when really, we were getting Sekiro too. That's literally what it is, albeit much shorter and easier. Thymesia was also, to our surprise, focused on individual, relatively linear levels. Run from start to finish, beat a boss, or complete an objective, on to the next level. And aside from this, the gameplay deviates from Sekiro in 2 other big ways. 1. You have losable souls that you spend to level up, although in this game they're called memory shards. And 2, you can't jump or grapple, so movement actually does more resemble souls. So, let's get into the combat. Like Sekiro, you're dealing with 2 enemy stats. You're combining regular attacks with consecutive parries, you have no stamina bar, and you've even got Thymesia's own version of Sekiro's iconic move, the Mikiri counter. But the way it all works together is a little different from what we're used to. Depleting health with regular attacks reveals the wound meter, which you can deplete with what they call plague attacks, which are pretty cool glowing green bird-themed attacks that match the whole plague doctor thing the main character Corvus has going on. If you don't keep up the pressure, the wound meter can just turn back into the health meter, forcing you to deplete it a second time. A design tactic to keep the player attacking, which was a big part of the design philosophy of Sekiro as well. Once you've depleted the wound meter all the way, the death blow icon appears. Nice. You might think the wound meter would take the place of the posture bar, but it's actually completely different since you have to use your plague attacks to deal with it. And since in Sekiro you could feasibly beat every enemy just by depleting the health and not dealing with their posture bar at all, Thymesia is, in this way, fundamentally different from the game that inspired it, even if the rhythm of consecutive parries and no stamina restriction feels familiar. Not to mention that the progression system actually offers slightly more customization than Sekiro. In addition to leveling up, you learn moves from a branching skill tree that forces you to decide between certain skills. The biggest decision you'll probably make is whether you want to be able to parry or block. That's right, you can only do one or the other. Feel like you can parry? You'd better be able to, because there's no alternative. Want to bitch out and be able to block? Too bad if you want fights to go quickly. Sheesh. Between not being able to block and parry at the same time and the inability to come back to life, you'd think this game would be harder than Sekiro, but no. Weirdly, it's way easier. One of the things that made Sekiro challenging was that in true From fashion, you encounter all kinds of crazy shit on your journey. Towering spear-wielding warlords, giant hammer mutants, bladed monster ninja guys, owl shinobi, divine fish people playing soccer, monkeys dual-wielding swords, undead trolls, giant snakes, the list goes on. Your enemy variety in Thymesia is nowhere near as daunting or as colorful. The biggest challenge of the game is the final boss, which is as it should be, but spoiler alert, you're just fighting against yourself, and the CPU's throwing all your moves against you. Even so, Thymesia was a really fun game that's definitely worth a play if you get your hands on it. It's not quite as interesting or varied as Sekiro, but it's got a really great atmosphere, and it'll still scratch that compulsive parrying itch. That is, if you choose to be able to parry. Moving on to Rise of the Ronin, a game that I just got and have not beaten yet, but I've played it for a while now, long enough to talk about it. Now, this game was made by Team Ninja, the same studio that made the Nioh games and Stranger of Paradise, all of which are terrific, so I went into this one with high hopes. Were they met? Well, sort of. Rise of the Ronin is an interesting game in general, because while the DNA is there, which is why we're talking about it in this episode, it isn't really solely a Sekiro-like. It's more like a fusion of Sekiro, Ghost of Tsushima, Nioh, and classic Assassin's Creed. But like Thymesia, because of its emphasis on timely repeated parries in combat, negotiating two enemy stats, and the death blow, it still qualifies. Rise brings back the ability to both block and parry, although unlike Sekiro, the actions are two different buttons, meaning that if you miss your parry, you're defenseless for a little bit, and there's no forgiveness for death in this one. Ugh, what the hell? What's with these games? I thought we were supposed to be more forgiving with death in these. What's more, the stamina bar comes back in this one. But at least this time there's an aesthetic purpose, where there's these nice moments in the combat where you and your foe just circle each other. Very cinematic. Like Sekiro, you focus on depleting your opponent's health and stamina, which I think they actually do call posture in this one, and once their stamina's gone, death blow time. Although in this one, death blows aren't guaranteed to kill regular enemies. Among other things to return from Sekiro are the ability to jump, the grappling hook, stealth mechanics, and kicking off your enemies mid-fight to deal additional stamina damage like you could in Sekiro. But like I mentioned, this is a game that's the love child of several other games, including normal Souls-likes. Interestingly, even though you level up and rise, you don't lose XP when you die, but you do lose your progress to the next skill point like Sekiro. But like Bloodborne, if you whoop on the dude who whooped you, you satisfy what the game calls a vendetta and get it back. Guess what happens if you die before then? Rise also introduces a glider, which comes in handy for both Breath of the Wild style traversal and airborne Arkham style assassinations. Good stuff. The game also brings in the feudal, more realistic presentation of Ghost of Tsushima, although this game is set in the 19th century, the ability to ride a horse across an open world from the same game, pretty much the exact same UI from Nioh, right down to the changing stances, although the rock, paper, scissors style execution of these stances is more like Ghost, and the parkour, city exploration, wanted mechanics, and pickpocketing of an Assassin's Creed game. Whoa. You guys remember our conversation about everything games a few episodes ago? We talked about how it's completely possible for a game to draw inspiration from several different sources, while still being its own thing, like the Star Wars Jedi games, for example. But I think for me personally, the big issue with Rise of the Ronin is that it's got a bit of an identity crisis going on. The Neo team clearly wanted to retain the gameplay and UI that they built for those games while bringing some Sekiro influence into the mix, which makes complete sense. But I think that bringing all this other stuff into the equation muddied the waters a little bit. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad game by any means. It's still a very fun experience. There's lots of different ways to kill things. I've been consistently entertained, and I probably will finish the game, but there's just something to be said for having a singularly focused vision and the experience that can come from that. And that's one thing that From is very, very good at. So even looking at just 2 games, even within the subgenre of a subgenre, we can see there's a ton of room for variety. It just goes to show how far you can take even the most simple of concepts if it's strong and the execution is good. With Sekiro, From hadn't just successfully reimagined the new gaming archetype they established another archetype in doing so. And with Souls-likes hotter than ever and showing no signs of slowing down, I'd only expect more Sekiro-likes in the future. Besides Lies of P, which is already on my radar, do you guys have any recommendations for Sekiro-likes to check out? Maybe I'd stream them, maybe I'd make another video on them or something like that. But regardless, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a good night.